industry for, God, going back to my first job working in a record store. I've been working in the music industry, I think, for close to 30 years now. And really don't know how to get out of it.
The lineup, you know, I did a series in San Francisco called Under the Radar, and we only did it for 5 years, and it was scrappy and bootstrapped and, you know, spit and duct tape and all sort of the punk rock aesthetic of what it takes just to get something like that done. And I look at just the magnitude of the lineup, the venues, the coordination, and all of those different elements that go into it. To see that you did that for 15 years is really astonishing and pretty amazing. You know, I know with Mutech and Canadian arts in general, there's a lot more government, state, local support for those types of events that frankly just don't exist in the United States in the same way. What were some of your challenges when you first got started to kind of pull everything together and to organize it?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things I found out real quick with Mutech. I went every year. I just FYI, I went to Mutech every year from 2002 until 2016. I attended every single program that they did in Montreal. And I got to know them really well. I was on several panel discussions. I was on a sort of a union, for lack of a better term, called the ICAS, which stands for the International Cities for Advanced Sound. And, you know, one of the things I found out working with all these international festivals and you know, speaking with the Mutech producers is that like a large percentage of their funding comes from the government, the Canadian government in the case of Mutech. In Germany, there's at the Gautier Institute, and pretty much every European and Canadian province and country has some sort of government funding that supports the arts. And they're not only supporting the high art, they're supporting experimental art, they're supporting hip hop, they're supporting street art. And when I came to Mutech early on, and they asked, how do you fund, you know, Decibel? Because I think we were the only festival, one of two festivals in the United States that was actually part of this ICAS organization of like 30 some festivals. I think it's like at 50 now. Mm-hmm. And I would literally, every time I got asked that, I'd pull out credit cards. One thing I did have a really good job at the time. When I started Decibel, I was working as a whole nother aspect of my life, as I've been a music supervisor for 15 years as well, for a company called Play Network. And, you know, at the time it was pretty good money. And I used that money and my good credit to essentially, you know, bootstrap and fund Decibel, which, you know, the first year I think we had like 1,000 people, and it cost like, you know, somewhere like in the $20,000 to produce. And I almost went bankrupt every year. Yeah. I think for 10 years, I at one point I had to refinance my home. At one point I had to sell my car. At one point I had to, I think, borrow money from a friend to pay an artist, but I never didn't pay anyone. Which I'm proud of. Every artist that ever
in the electronic music world, that's kind of part and parcel. But I do feel like what I've always respected about Decibel has been that Decibel, to me, rides this line between having names on the bill that, for lack of a better word, would be like big tent acts, next to different acts that have more of a experimental aesthetic, that have different elements to them, which I always thought, you know, in terms of programming, I thought it was one of the best run, organized, and presented festivals that have been out there. And you know, but to know that behind the scenes that there wasn't a big brand, to me that's even more impressive, to know that there's one person that does that, because clearly you're doing it for the love of what it is. But I also feel like when you look at Mutech as it's the red phone. I don't think. Sorry, we're busy. Sorry about that. I get regular phone calls from God on this phone. It's a very long story. But you've got this ability to program things that, in my experience, to me, I love just going out and raving and dancing and having a good time, and that's always, you know, something that's been part of my life for years and years. But when you look at the type of programming that you put together and at the scale that you put it together, I don't think there's been anything in the United States that's the equivalent of what that is, or North America, with the exception of Mutek. And I'm curious about how you got to the point where you wanted to showcase these more left of center artists in this sort of larger framework and context.
I mean, it goes back to, those early days of discovering Aphex Twin and Richie Hawtin. I always loved, and growing up, you probably know this, but, in the early days of the, late 80s, to early 90s rave culture, there was always the ambient room and the dance room. And so I always wanted to make sure that we had some level of programming that spoke to ambient music, neoclassical music. So artists like Niels Fromm, for example, we had his first, I think his second rather North American performance, and now he's selling out Disney Hall and, one of the great composers of our times. But, I was really keen to have something from a format perspective that each venue kind of became its own identity within the grand scheme of the breadth of electronic music, which, as we know now, there's hundreds of subgenres of. And it was about telling a story. It was about creating a program where if I was an attendee, I would want to have the program on this particular trajectory. For example, the conference took place during the day. The what we call the optical events would take place in the early evening. And, those were the sit down, sort of like preparing yourself to go out dancing for, sometimes 18 hours after that. And then each venue, depending on the type of venue it was, whether it was a nightclub, whether it was a, dusty old rock club, whether it was an outdoor space, I would program the music and within the showcase, actually program the artist so that each thing could exist as its own entity. But you could also, as somebody that wanted to just come in and experience what it was to hear Detroit techno, or dubstep in its early infancy before it became stupid, or ambient music or neoclassical music. You could kind of look at this program and be like, okay, I want to experience this, this, and this. And most people would tell me that when they look at our program that they maybe only know 20% of the artists. And that to me was a good thing. Mm-hmm. I was doing my job by introducing people to artists that I loved and that I was getting to expose people to for the first time. Because of that, we had so many debut performances. We had Modeselektor's first ever North American performance.
Wow.
We had Moderat's first ever performance. We had the first US debut of Emon Tobin Isom Live, which was, from a video mapping and projection standpoint, one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life to this day. A lot of things we were able to debut it because we were sort of known as this, left of center, leading edge organization. And as me as a DJ, it ties into my DJing and production and also being a music supervisor. I had my ear to the ground, and I still do have my ear to the ground to find those artists that maybe, weren't broken yet, but I saw that they have potential to do something. I always got a lot of people asking me why I didn't work in A&R and management. And I just, that aspect of the music industry didn't really appeal to me. But I had agents and managers coming to Decibel every year and signing artists only to make it so that I couldn't afford to book them the following year. But it happened all the time. I think we had Flying Lotus one year. I think I paid him $1,000, and the next year he got signed to Windish, and it was $10,000. And I was just like, guess we're not booking Flying Lotus anymore.
Well, to me, that's a couple of things that really stand out about what you just said. It seems like, and I've known people who have gone religiously, who went to Decibel almost for every single Decibel festival. And I went to college in Dallas and spent some time in Dallas. And my friend Wands Dover, he goes by under a series of different monikers, but he was at Decibel religiously for over a decade. And I remember, of all of the things that you were talking about in terms of these acts that would come out, it seems like, because when I saw these performers that you had just listed off, they were in huge venues. Like the Emon Tobin, same show, the Isom show, was at the Greek Theater, which is a radically different type of environment than the small club or left of center type of place. And it seems like Decibel almost served as a jumping off point or proving ground for some of these acts to say like, okay, we're going to play the Decibel Festival, and by that they're kind of propelled into something much larger and much bigger. Do you feel like Decibel played that role, and that your role in that was as someone who wanted to kind of create a larger audience for that work?
Yeah, I mean, I was always proud. One of the things that I was always looking at with Decibel was like, is it a world debut? Is this a collaboration or something that has never been seen or performed before? And very much like Mutek. Mutek's in the same, even more so on Mutek's. I think on Mutek's side, it's something like 75% of the performances are debuts, many of which are world debuts or North American debuts. I think for us, it was closer to like 25, 30%.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that Decibel was really unique about, and this is something that I feel, Mutek instilled in me, was like always having a visual art element that is specifically curated with that artist. So whether it's an artist performing an audiovisual performance, which a lot of artists like Amon Tobin do,
Mm-hmm.
or we have a collection of VJs that were incredible. For whatever reason, Seattle has an incredible, I think it's because the tech scene there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an amazing amount of like talented visual artists and VJs that, a lot of them are just programmers and they kind of work on the side with these, software packages and VJing. And, I would pair them up knowing their artwork and knowing what they do live with these artists. And that combination in itself was creating a world debut almost every time, because, the visual aspect of electronic music, like if you go to like EDM festivals, it's crap. It's just the same LED laser bullshit. Like, I don't want to see that. I want to see something where like somebody took the time to get to know this person's music, talked with them, maybe had a few meetings with them, maybe the artist shared some ideas with them, and they come together and form something that me is like this perfect union of visual art and live electronic music, which most of what we booked was live. I mean, there was definitely DJs. I think, we're probably about 80-20% live electronic music to DJ based. So, it was definitely unique in that way. The other thing that was unique about it is the only festival really like it where it took place within neighborhoods at various venues, and we'd sort of take over the neighborhood, almost like what South by Southwest does, or a film festival would do, where it's not a big outdoor, porta potty experience. It's like each venue has its own production, its own infrastructure, its own vibe, and that was the thing I personally thought was missing from most festivals. Is like you go to a stage and you're just outdoors, and it's the same production company producing every stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I still go to Coachella because I get invited to, and there's some artists there that I like to see, but there's something different about seeing an artist in like a confined, intimate space where there's sweat literally dripping off the walls, and like everyone in there is on the same page, and the artists love it. I mean, I remember Speedy J, the first time we had him out in 2005, one of those artists that I grew up listening to, he said it's the best festival he's ever played. And, he said that publicly in a venue. And it's like, I was like, what are you talking about? And I didn't understand at the time, but I think the attention to detail on the sound quality, the visual art, and then just the experience of the fans being, obviously, influenced by that sound quality and that venue and that production. It's all united. And if you have a crap sound system, people's experience is probably going to be diminished by that. So we would bring in the best sound systems, the best lighting configurations, and keep in mind, this is all being funded by credit cards.
Yeah.
So the way that I pulled that off was through partnerships. And thankfully, the Pacific Northwest, you have Macaulay, and you have at the time KV2 Audio, and you have Mackie, and you have all these companies that are based there that wanted to like test out new systems and new rigs. So the same way we were testing out new performances and doing these world debut performances, we were actually testing out new technology. Even Microsoft was coming to the table and presenting new audiovisual sort of like interactive exhibits and things like that. I remember Macaulay had this PA system that they brought in that had 4 21-inch coupled subs. And I remember it was so intense that it actually broke the pipes of the venue. And I was like, that made my festival program, to know that we actually destroyed the plumbing of a venue with the sound system we brought in.
Crazy. So what's interesting about this is that obviously, and I think this goes a long way to explaining, I think, to me, sort of that time and effort and energy. It becomes a labor of love on so many levels.
Yeah.
For me, I think spending the time and effort and energy as much as I think a big part of, for me, being creative is also about connecting with people, building community, exposing different people to different things. There's only so much bandwidth a person has to maybe focus on their own work, focus on the work outside. And then, of course, because we live where we live, it's also like, oh yeah, also I have a full-time day job that I actually spend, you know, 40 to 50 hours a week doing, that actually pays my mortgage and takes care of the rest of my life. How is it? How did the sort of promotion organization of the festival pair with you as a DJ and producer, and spending time to build out your own discography and to kind of put yourself out there? I mean, obviously, as a promoter, you know you're always going to get a gig, right? Right. You don't have to worry about your own bookings. But how,
that's a good point.
How do those two things compete for your time, and how have you sort of reconciled those two things?
Yeah, first thing I would say is I never liked the term promoter. I know that I know enough promoters to know that that's not technically what I set out to do when I started this. So I always preferred curator.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but you know, I see a lot of promoters that are doing it for financial reasons or to book themselves. To your point, that was never the intention with this. In terms of balancing my, you know, at the time, marriage, full-time job, my own DJing, my own production. I had a recording studio that I was running in addition to this. I was on several boards of directors. I was on the Grammy board. I worked for the city. You know, like I was probably, I'd say for at least 15 years, I was putting in 80 hours a week between the day job and all of the extracurricular activities. And that includes working, you know, every Friday and Saturday night as a DJ or a talent buyer, because we were doing shows outside of Decibel, obviously. Right. I think we did more shows outside of Decibel than we did within the program. And the program itself was 150 acts over 5 days and about 40 showcases. And that's for just a week, you know, basically 1 week. So, you know, we're doing more than that outside of the year. You can imagine that's a lot of work. But I needed the job to pay for, you know, Decibel because it wasn't making money. It was losing money every year. I think we had 2 out of the 15 years we were profitable. And because of that, I was lucky enough to have a very much a dedicated volunteer-based staff around me where, you know, we all sort of wanted the experience and loved the music and agreed that, you know, the artists need to get paid and that there needs to be a budget to apply to make this thing happen. But at the end of the day, we're doing it for the experience and for the labor of love, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that was unique as well. That's the kind of thing where like Mutech, they have like a paid staff. They never understood how we were able to do what we do. And I just told them it takes a dedicated team. And it's not just a team, it's friends. These are people that, like, I remember when I started Decibel, it started with me on this back in the days of, you know, email lists. I think it was called Euphoria was the email list that I was on. And I remember going to Mutech and then messaging this email group in Seattle and being like, I have an idea. Let's start an electronic music festival in the Pacific Northwest. I think at the time it was like the Pacific Northwest Electronic Music Festival, sure, which is a horrible name, but it was like, I didn't know what to call it. So that was literally how we sort of set out to do it. Mm-hmm. And it was just all these friends of mine that, you know, knew who I was and trusted that I, you know, had an idea that was worth listening to. And I think the first meeting we had like 50 people, and like, I'd say out of that, half of them were like, this is a stupid idea. And I was like, okay, great. You know, I'm going to continue down this path. And the 25 that remained, I'd say there's maybe like 10 of them became like the sort of core team of Decibel. And that team, I would say, probably had about 5 different incarnations. Most people would last anywhere from like 2 to 3 years. Yeah. I had a few people that lasted like almost a decade with me, but for the most part, it was just me and then this group of people that would be recycled in to, you know, want to learn. And the great thing about that is like several of the people I worked with, Chechi, Rafael, you know, like even Kate Lesta, who did Community Festival, they went on to do their own festivals and produce their own events. That, you know, that was always the point. You know, it was like, learn from this, learn from my mistakes, learn from my, you know, the money pit of, you know, endless finances that I throw at this thing, learn from it, experience it, you know, get to know the artists, get to know the people involved, get to know the agents and managers, and do your own thing. Because at the end of the day, you know, the only way this community grows is if you learn and then do your own thing. And I think we saw that with like Detroit techno, you know, in the mid city, you know, in the Midwest. St. Louis had its own scene, Kansas had its own scene, Milwaukee had its own scene, and it all started in Detroit and then grew out because people experienced that, you know, warehouse culture, that vibe, and then we're like, I'm going to do this in my own city, and they could replicate it because they lived in urban environments that, much like Detroit, were basically ripe for the picking to throw a giant warehouse party.
So with all of that happening, it seems like, you know, it wouldn't leave you afford you a lot of time for your own work, right? How, I mean, it obviously, for what you studied and where your head's at and where you are aesthetically, I'm sure that that's something that you know, because I've heard your original material. I think you are a fantastic producer, and
I appreciate it.
And I would love to hear more. The BMX Love Machine is funny. That track in particular, I just have banged that so many times, and I'm putting that on a mix that I'm doing for Omakase Radio.
Oh, nice.
In a couple of weeks. So, but my point is, you're a fantastic producer, and I'm just curious, like, how do you find time to work on your own material or to work on your own mixes and kind of focus on that part of your life?
I mean, I definitely, you know, took one for the team with Decibel, and I knew that going into it, that, you know, it was going to, I mean, I studied audio engineering and composition. That was what I went to school for.
Right.
And it's still my greatest passion is being able to create music, produce music, compose music. And, you know, it definitely took a back seat. I was still producing, you know, and still do to this day, you know, much more so, I would say, in college and then directly out of college. When I was in Portland, I think I produced like over 100 tracks the year that I was in Portland, because I was, you know, working part-time and then just coming home and producing. And I mean, if I'd have continued down that trajectory, I'm confident I would have been a professional artist. But I saw a greater value in taking my love of electronic music and take my love of visual art. Mutech really, it sort of put its hooks in me. And I saw that, like, all these people coming together and supporting these artists and allowing these artists to, because like Mutech was setting up tours that would allow these artists to even come into North America. And I was like, why can't we do that in the US on the West Coast? And to me, it was just like, you know, when I moved to Seattle, there was no electronic music scene. It was post-rave, it was dead. I think the electro clash was just starting to kind of like rise up a little bit, but there was nothing. And when I moved back there for this job, working at Play Network as a music supervisor, I was like, I don't want to live in a city that doesn't have a scene that would support what I do.
Right.
So my concept was to start a production company, which prior to Decibel Festival, I started a production company called Dreaming in Stereo. That was what gave birth to Decibel. The whole point of that was to be able to like enjoy the music I love by creating a community of it. And it worked. You know, I think we did like 6 events under the Dreaming in Stereo moniker. And by the end of it, we were getting asked by the venue talent buyers to like, you know, like, hey, you guys should do this on the weekend as opposed to a weekday. And you guys should do this more often. And we love what you do. And that's really, those relationships early on with those venues is what obviously gave birth to Decibel Festival.
That's excellent. So, you know, let's fast forward a few years. So, you know, Decibel in Seattle kind of has its logical conclusion. You make your way out to Los Angeles. So can you tell me a little bit about how you made it out to LA and what you've been up to since then?
It was really, I had already made the decision to sell my home, resign from my job. I had sort of a, you know, the great thing is that the 2015 program of Decibel was my personal favorite. So we ended, you know, at least in terms of the Seattle program, it ended on a very high note for me. It was also my 40th birthday. There was just a bunch of things. It was like that moment in time where I was like, I can't, you know, just keep doing this. Like I had hit my wall. I think I'd sort of maxed out what I was capable of doing in Seattle with my job and with Decibel. And I was just sort of like, I don't know where I want to go from here, but I know that I can't keep doing this. I'd recently gotten divorced. every aspect of my life was sort of in chaos because of Decibel, because of my day job, because of everything we just discussed. And to me, the only way to really, change it, the same thing when I moved from Detroit to Seattle, is just sort of like throw caution in the wind and go for it. And LA was not it wasn't a decision. It was an accident, much like Seattle was. Seattle,
Right.
I ended up in Seattle because my van broke down in Seattle when I was on a road trip. And the same thing in LA. The only reason LA was even on my roadmap is because at the time that Decibel always took place the end of September, and the weather was starting to, get shitty. And as I mentioned, I had already resigned and sold my house. So I was just sort of like, I want to go at least where there's some decent weather. So obviously head south. I think I threw like my drum machine, DJ mixer, laptop, some clothes, and, like, I can't remember what else, in my car, and just drove south.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really good friend. I have a really good friend in LA, John Tejada, who actually played the very first Decibel Festival. And to this day, we're close friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that, I'd already told him, like, I had the idea of leaving Seattle, and he and his lovely wife, Lynn, mentioned that, hey, if you ever want to come down and hang in LA, we got a spare bedroom. So I kind of took him up on that. And John was actually the person that introduced me to the Arts District neighborhood here in LA, which is still one of my favorite neighborhoods here. It reminds me a lot of Detroit, just in terms of the industrial kind of aspects of it. The old Henry Ford plant is right there. And like, I used to party in the old Henry Ford plant in Detroit. So it just felt like a natural progression for me. It's almost like I was taking the industrial aspects of Detroit and my roots and planting them in an environment where the weather was, consistently good.
Yeah.
Which, growing up in Detroit and then living for, almost 20 years in the Pacific Northwest, weather was a key factor here.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think I've mentioned on Facebook that I was in LA, and a buddy of mine, Josh Greenberg, who at the time was working for Red Bull, reached out and said, hey, I'm doing this thing with Red Bull called Red Bull Sound Select, which was a basically sort of like a pilot program for emerging artists
Mm-hmm.
that I thought was really cool, and it actually tied in pretty well with Decibel, because they were doing the same thing I was doing, more on the hip hop and sort of indie rock and some electronic tip. But it seemed like a good fit, and he basically said, "I think you're the perfect fit for this." I wound up taking the job, I think, a month after I moved to LA, and did that for a little over a year. And I came out. It definitely changed my perception of the corporate sort of work ethic and life. And one of the problems with that particular situation is that they made me sign a non-compete agreement to not produce any Decibel events. And that was a really hard pill to swallow, but it's something that at the time I didn't really know where Decibel was going. I didn't know what I wanted to do. My initial plan was to do it in LA, obviously. And I'm still doing events here and there, but I think with Red Bull kind of like, for a year, at least a year, telling me I can't, continue producing Decibel, I think, because I knew it would probably get in the way of work. And it was essentially a competing sort of thing.
Right.
Even on like the concept side, I had to make the difficult decision, and there was a public sort of press release that came out and saying, like, I'm, basically taking a year off, was sort of the way I put it. And that meant, if I was taking a year off, obviously that meant Decibel wouldn't be taking place that year, which was 2016. After Red Bull, which, pretty much burned me out, to be honest. I mean, I was traveling all over the world. It was exciting, but I just didn't want to think or work after that. And the last thing I wanted to do was jump right back into a high pressure, difficult, stressful situation after living in one for
Sure.
for 16 years. So I jumped from Red Bull to doing a talent buyer gig at a venue here in LA called Catch One, which is formerly Jules Catch One,
Mm-hmm.
which was where a lot of the early, that was one of the first clubs to really adopt the early rave movement. And it was the first African American disco in North America. There's a lot of things about it that I was just like, how have I never heard about this place?
I didn't realize the history of that place. Interesting.
There's a documentary. About it called Jules Catch One that I highly recommend anyone that's listening to check out.
Cool.
But I actually met the owner, the former owner, Jewel, who actually was running an acupuncture clinic next door to the venue, and I befriended her. I kind of fell in love with her personality.
Mhm.
She's, essentially a very outspoken, politically active, African-American lesbian that ran the U.S. first African-American disco for, I think it was like 28 years. It was, going back to the 70s, at the peak of disco, and everyone went through there, man. Prince played there. Magic Johnson used to hang out there. It was the place to be, in Mid City, and the community that grew around that. I guess Marvin Gaye lived right down the street. It was just like that was the Hollywood of African American culture in the 70s and the 80s, and I still live in that neighborhood to this day. I live in West Adams, which borders Mid City,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
and I think it's the most vibrant and culturally diverse and historically relevant places in the world, and that's why I live here.
Yeah. No,
um,
I love West Adams. In fact, I have a friend, Tamara Palmer, who's
I know Tamara.
oh yeah, well she would play the delicious pizza gigs where they would do
Yeah, I booked her for that. That was me.
I love those. I love those.
Yeah.
Those are the
Yeah.
best.
So
It's one of the few things that I was able to bring. I have a little boy who's 7 years old, and it was just like this perfect mix of like the record truck, DJs playing, really good food, good drinks. It was like a great mix of everything. I love West Adams. It is a fantastic neighborhood.
yeah. So coming along to what I'm doing today, I run an organization. It's an Instagram feed and a website called West Adams Family. We
Mhm.
produce the delicious pizza West Adams Family Functions, which you're referring to. That's where Tamara played.
Yeah.
We co-produce the West Adams Block Party, which is geared more towards reggae, hip hop. Last year we had Big Daddy Kane. The year
So
before that we had Dougie Fresh, and it's a great festival, and I co-produce that with the Delicious folks, who are close friends of mine now, and that's 2 blocks from my home, so I eat pizza there all the time. So I kind of gotten back to my roots of community building and producing these grassroots festivals, not necessarily by design, but and to be truthful, I'm wearing a Kroonbin shirt here. My tastes have changed completely since moving to LA.
yeah.
I don't think I would want to produce Decibel here. I would want to do something that was more geared towards R&B, psych rock, soul, hip hop, because the community here, the artistry and the community here around that has changed my perception of music indefinitely. LA is the most vibrant music community in the world. I'm 100% convinced of that. And when you look at the artists that are here, the artists that come here to produce and to become creatively engaged with all these other artists who live here, it's second to none. And I didn't know that moving here. I really didn't.
It's a funny thing because you can go to a city like Seattle or Portland or San Francisco, and there's a cohesiveness to that city, right? There's like that this city has established certain scenes in certain places. The thing with Los Angeles, in my experience, it's like 15 of those different cities all kind of smashed up together.
It's not a city; it's a country.
Yeah. It is. It is.
Country.
You can go to Venice Beach one day, and then you can go to Pomona, and then you can go to the Valley, and then, I mean, aesthetically, if you were to be dropped in these places individually, having never had that experience here, you would think you were in an entirely different place. I mean, I live on the west side on Sunset, but it's not like Sunset in Hollywood. It's a radically different proposition. So I think there's a lot to. If you see what happened with the beat scene with like Flying Lotus, Gaslamp Killer, Low End Theory, that whole crew, like that's something that was like specific to their community and those people there, and it just blew up and went international because they've just had that energy behind it. But those are, if you look at the tentacles from all of that, I did a few years back, I did one on the podcast with Jeff Parker from Tortoise, and the number of people that he's working with that sort of defy genre. I think I've really never been a fan of kind of pigeonholing things. I mean, I know there's
100%. Yeah, I hate it.
Yeah, I hate it too. It's just, and I think when you get to a certain stage of your life or creative development, like you had said, that you felt that you would call yourself more of a curator than you would a promoter. And I think that title is really, really relevant, probably more so now than it ever has been, because there are some clearly well-defined bright lines in my experience where, a few years ago, the Broad started doing these events that would combine audio and video and live
Yeah, I
art.
went to a couple of them. They were really cool.
That to me is exactly what I think the logical trajectory of, someone who's been doing this for a couple of decades now. I would say there's a very logical trajectory of when you get to a certain point that you want something more evolved, something that's a little bit more aesthetically challenging, maybe something that kind of goes past your preconceived ideas of what you're supposed to do. And in a pandemic like we're in now,
yeah,
you kind of have to reconfigure your idea about what it means to be in that creative process. So, that kind of leads me to my next question, is that now that we are just right in the middle of this shitstorm pandemic, A, how has that impacted what you want to do with Decibel as a brand? And B, how has that just impacted the rest of your life?
I'll tell you one thing, it makes me really glad I'm not living off of being a curator and event producer. We had to cancel, I think, 4 shows. We had like Square Pusher, and we had some pretty big shows that we had to cancel, but thankfully, the venue and the agents and managers involved in that, we were able to do it amicably and move on. And I think we even have a few makeup dates down the line in 2021, which is when most things seem to be coming back online.
Right.
Which is still a long ways from now. So my heart goes out to the entire entertainment industry and the sports industry and the hospitality industries that's been impacted by this. It's not just what I, have historically been doing. I'm also lucky to work for a company that was able to pivot pretty seamlessly into the streaming world. And, I've sort of been at the forefront of that conversation going back to even March and building out resource documents that I shared with people. I'm like open source. Like I don't I have a hard time not sharing information. And one of the things that I was able to create and share early on was this resource document relative to streaming that I think has now been shared over like 10,000 times. And it's just like everything you need to know, the different platforms, the limitations, the licensing, the technology used, the cheapest way to do it, the most expensive way to do it, how to promote it once you have a stream live. And that information and that knowledge has sort of been able to be applied directly to my day job, working for Dice. And we're now at the forefront of pay-per-view streams, which I keep telling people, like, people are paying money for this. People are willing to pay money to watch a quality live music experience. We saw it with Nick Cave. We saw it with Laura Marling. We've seen it with, Disclosure, all these artists we've worked with. And there is a way for event producers, promoters, managers, venues, artists to make money during a pandemic. And it's just, there's no roadmap. You just have to kind of do it. And you have to have partners like Dice to kind of guide you down that road so that you make the right decisions and you know how to do it. And there's best practices, but it's so new. It's a whole new paradigm.
Right.
And I don't see that changing. I think that the streaming thing, sadly, is probably going to be with us for at least the next, 12 to 16 months.
Yeah.
And even when things do go back to a place where there's a vaccine, which is what most people are saying they need in order to feel comfortable going to a festival or even a venue, why wouldn't you just continue offering that experience for people that maybe want to watch it online, or maybe they don't live in LA and they want to experience what it's like to see Khruangbin perform live in an intimate venue, and the best way they'll be able to do that is to watch it live on their television or on their laptop or on their smartphone or whatever. So I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic, but I'm particularly optimistic because I'm on the front line of the streaming revolution, and I'm seeing what's happening with it. And I'm talking with venues and artists and managers and agents every day that are like, this works. We're seeing a large number of people globally paying. And that the other great thing about that is that data that you're collecting from those people that will allow you, when things do reopen, to make a educated decision on where to go. Like if you're saying like, oh my God, we sold 1,000 tickets in London, we didn't even know we had an audience there. That should be an indication that, hey, maybe you should be going to London when things get back to normal. And that's been what's kept me afloat the past 5 months now, is just knowing that I work for an organization that's on the front line of something I'm passionate about, which is live music, and trying to find a way to sustain that community so that it doesn't go bankrupt. you know, which it will otherwise. If you were just waiting for this to end, it's not going to happen. It's, you know, and we're seeing that with venues like the Troubadour that are, you know, setting up GoFundMe account. The Troubadour has got to be one of the top 5 most iconic venues in North America. They're struggling, you know, and it's like, it makes me really concerned for smaller independent venues, promoters, artists. You know, obviously AEGs and Live Nations of the world have taken a massive hit.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not, whatever, you know, like they'll probably get, you know, hundreds of millions of investment from various international organizations like Live Nation did from Saudi Arabia. But independent venues and artists and promoters, they don't have that luxury. They don't have.
And that to me is kind of the weird, scary sort of post-apocalyptic moment that we're in right now. And that is, I feel like the artists themselves need to almost kind of take their destiny in their own hands to some degree.
They do. That's what I've been saying. Yeah.
The satellite, like all of these different smaller venues that will give an opportunity to acts that are more left of center or more underground or not a quote unquote sure thing. I mean, obviously programming is a big part of that, but at the end of the day, the places where you would go to find these things, I mean, you know, you and I are, I think, demographically similar. So the age of going into the record store or having that curatorial you know, experience of somebody saying, hey, this is something I'm into, check out these records, that's been replaced with algorithms to some degree, right?
Yeah, sadly, I miss those days.
Yeah, well, I do too. In fact, and to some degree, I think it's almost that same aesthetic now where you're like, look, we need to just come together as a community to kind of sustain this thing until we figure out what that next logical step is. Because at the end of the day, there's nobody at these larger organizations that have a vested interest in breaking new talent necessarily, not in the same way of the people that are like you said, have their ear to the ground. They're looking for something new. They want to be challenged, or they just want to have a different experience. I mean, arts, if you want to take generally what we are involved with and move it over into the arts community aspect of things, well, that's a whole different structure. And I mean, we're coming from like the party rave scene world, right? In some very tangible ways. And to be able to translate that into something that would be more appropriate for an art venue, you know, there's still some hurdles to clear with that. But I do feel like there's almost this DIY element to saying, okay, well, now that we've kind of had these experiences, it's very difficult for me to go back to a corn dog club after I've experienced the things that I've experienced at something like Tech or Decibel, or with these different artists that I have that sort of, you know, connection with. There's a lot of work that creatives themselves are going to have to do to kind of keep this community alive, you know? Yeah. And to that point, you know, you're obviously involved in the live streaming piece of things, but what in terms of Decibel and kind of moving forward, because I know that the events that I went to that you had put together were the Plaid and John Tejada show, and then Wagon Christ, the Wagon Christ show. What is your plan for after things, you know, start to come out of this, you know, pandemic situation?
I mean, I just booked 3 shows for fall 2021 this week, actually. So it's happening.
Okay, so tell me about those. What are those shows?
Yeah. I don't know if I can yet because I still don't have a contract.
Okay.
I can tell you that one of them you're going to be very excited about. I'll say it's a warp artist. We'll go that far.
Okay.
You know, these are basically very indicative of the events that you've been to.
Is it and already previously booked to play but got canceled?
No, different one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
But you know, so and it's starting to happen. I'd say this week was the first week where it feels like international tours, which international is a whole nother ball of wax. Regionally, I think will obviously come back online sooner. And luckily we live in LA where there's a ton of talent.
Right.
So I see LA, you know, assuming we can squash these numbers and get back to a place where the rest of the world seems to be and quit being idiots, then, you know, I could see, you know, early 2021. You know, I know that Coachella's planned for April 2021.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how people feel about that, but, you know, with 250,000 people, swapping spit in the desert. It sounds appealing to you right now. It doesn't. So we got a ways to go.
Well,
but
that's a live stream opportunity, I think.
I don't know what's going to happen with larger festivals. But I know on my end, the plan is I would say mid to late 2021 for international acts, which a lot of the stuff that I do obviously is internationally based. And hopefully when things do reopen, it's done safely. It's done in a way that is avoiding any sort of potential for someone with COVID to come into a venue and obviously infect everyone. I've seen some statistics and data and obviously processes that need to be in place for venues to reopen.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems pretty thorough. I mean, the base thing is like we've been wearing masks for a long time. That's the first thing everyone needs to get used to. If you got a problem wearing a mask,
then you anyway, right?
Yeah, like wear a fucking mask, please. And because that at least brings it down to like 3% versus like 100% infection rate.
Yeah.
And but beyond that, I just feel like what does a social distance dance club look like? Because most dance clubs, to my knowledge, and most venues, in my knowledge, need to be at 75% capacity in order to make a living. Like that's their break even. At least for me, my break even is about 75% capacity. And if I'm being told you got 25% or 50% capacity in order to make sure there's enough room for people to like effectively set up, probably with tables or squares. I've seen it both.
Right.
I don't think in a dance realm that makes a lot of sense. I think in a jazz show, I think in a sit down rock show, I think in a seated venue where you can, section off seats, that probably makes more sense. But in terms of like the interactivity and the sweat and physicality of a dance, venue, I just think raves and dance clubs are probably going to be one of the last things to come online. I just don't see it any other way.
Yeah. Is there plans? Are you working in the digital space to do streaming and to do some other things with?
Oh yeah, no, we've been working in it since March, and we have venues, we have a paywall option, we have a global marketing reach, we have the ability to collect data, we have a whole fan engagement team. I mean, through Dice, we essentially have all of the pieces, minus like the production end, but we have production partners that we can partner with in order to do that. And yeah, it's working. It's 100% working, and it's going to grow. I do see that like Europe, which is now coming back online, a lot of the venues that we're doing the streaming are starting to experiment with like these hybrid models where maybe it's 50% capacity and they're using streaming as the other part of it. But for the most part, I think the hybrid model will be the first thing to kind of happen next. Right now we're in the streaming phase. The hybrid model of having a select number of people in the venue and then using the stream as a way to augment income will probably be the next phase.
I think that's amazing, to be honest. There's so many shows that for whatever reason, you're not able to go to internationally that I think would be amazing opportunity. So
it's going to happen. Yeah,
I think so. So is there anything else going on that you'd like to share before we wrap it up today?
Not really. I think we covered quite a bit of ground here. I've
got to say, I've been just a big fan of yours for a very long time, and I think what you're doing is really, really necessary. And just personally, the shows that I've gone to that you've put on here, and my experience with what you've done personally, it means a lot. There's just not a lot of people that are flying the flag for things that are left of center or kind of converge with the art world in that way, which is really surprising to me, considering that, in the early aughts when I was doing stuff in San Francisco, it seemed to be coming out of the woodwork locally even. So to have somebody here that's kind of pushing the boundaries of what's that world looks like is just really appreciated. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Really great questions, and I haven't talked about this stuff in like 5 years, so it's good to kind of go down memory lane a little bit. And I encourage everyone out there to check out Decibel, look at our previous lineups. We have content, I think, online, and just keep an ear to the ground, because we're definitely going to be doing the streaming thing. We're definitely going to be doing live events coming back online, and me myself, I'm continuing to DJ and explore music, and I don't think this pandemic has impacted my creativity or my desire to explore music. So hopefully other people feel the same way.
I think
I know it's
a big wave of new music coming out from all kinds of places in the next 6 months.
I hope so. I mean, I know the friends that I talk to that are like, professional producers, they're exploring depths of their emotion and intellect in a way that they never would have if they were touring and playing every night. Like, people are just going a different direction with their creative process and with the kind of music they produce. And I do expect over the next 6 months to a year to have a lot of really solid releases and albums come out that quite potentially will redefine that artist's career. I think that isolation can be a real good thing creatively. It can be damaging and it can be psychologically painful, but I think I'm like most people, I'm most creative and I'm the most productive when I'm struggling. And having, whether it's emotional pain that's cathartically needing to be dealt with through music. And I just hope other people are having a similar sort of take on it. I also think sobriety was probably a good thing in a lot of cases where people are like really getting into their own head and meditating and hopefully, practicing healthier habits, because I mean, I can't speak for the whole LA nightlife scene, but, right before this hit, man, I was sort of at a point where I'm like, I didn't want to like party. I wanted to kind of like experience music, for the music and not for the party, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
And,
absolutely.
And I hopefully that's something that other people are experiencing as well. I'm not judgmental about it. I just feel like for me in my personal life as a 40-year-old living in LA right now, I'm really happy, taking hikes and hanging out in nature and doing yoga and eating healthy and experiencing music in a new context, whether that is live, whether that's streamed, that remains to be seen. But it's been difficult, but hopefully some good comes out of it, and I'm optimistic.
Well, it's fantastic to have the conversation, Sean. Thank you so much for your time, and we will be looking forward to what you do in the future, and we'll keep an ear out for everything that's happening in the realm of Decibel Festival. So thank you so much, Sean. Have a great rest of your day today, and we will see you soon, okay? Take care, man.
Sounds good, Steven. Take care.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.